Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to another installment of the Healing Brothers podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Brandon Jones, and I'm with the legendary Sam Simmons. How you doing today, Sam?
Yeah, you and that legendary. Okay. What a legend in my own mind or somebody else's mind. Huh?
You're a legend in mine, at least. At the very least, you're a legend in my mind.
I'm a legend in your mind. Okay. Well, I'm not gonna argue the point, okay? That
Sounds
may
good.
yeah. So what's up today?
Today, we're going to talk about healing and what does healing look like from a individual level, from a family based level. A lot of times we talk about intergenerational trauma, and we get caught in the conversations, these anti-racism type of conversations about all the trauma that the white system has done to us as Black people, but we don't always focus on the trauma that is done within our own community amongst ourselves. And a question was posed to us, two questions were posed to us about doing that healing work. And when you're dealing with the things that have happened in the community and in your family, is it important for you to heal yourself first? Is it more constructive, or is it more constructive to wait for your family to do the healing? So we want to have a conversation about who's healing and when, and how do you broach the conversation, and how you deal with the pain within our own families. Which is interesting because one of I won't say the peaks of your career, but one of the things that really put you out there is you telling your family story and how people have responded to that.
Yeah. And I and that actually that uh portions of that video is actually on YouTube, you know.
Mm.
And it's still on YouTube if I'm not mistaken. Um, and I deliberately uh, filmed it in black and white, to kind of emphasize the history piece. And I think telling the story about why I did that probably could help us, kind of frame this conversation. Is that I was part of a project. I think that was the early 2000s. Uh, where we were doing a series of community conferences on depression. And, we had some churches involved. We had community organizations. They called the Black and Blue. So it was really going on the idea of how identifying depression from a Black perspective when, African Americans have, really dealt with their uh, depression in what we call the blues. So the Black and Blue is what the title came from. And they had a part one, which I wasn't involved with, but they had a part two where ended up being on the planning committee. And then later on, it's interesting how things has happened for me. Is I was part of the planning committee, but they weren't planning on having me as part of the presentation. And as we went on with planning, some things fell apart along the way, um, and that kind of thing, where I ended up being part of the presentation. And so you know how you had different members, Black psychologists and clergy, and them were talking directly about depression. And I didn't really fully plan for this, but I said, this, instead of just talking about straight depression, let's talk about uh, trauma at the time. And I don't even think I used the word trauma, but well, I guess I did. And what I did is I started talking about my grandparents and my parents and that kind of stuff, and really talking about my trauma. The statement was my trauma started before I was born,
Mm.
and my trauma started before my grandparents were born, right? When we're talking about Black people. And I really started talking about my mother and father, and which was important because there was some things that happened in our family that um, I never really fully made peace with at the time, and actually, lo and behold, was making peace with it in the moment, of the time, not realizing it. Is when I talked about the circumstances of why my mother and father got married. Okay. My mother and father got married. I think my father was 19 and my mother was 17. And part of the reason they got married is that she was pregnant with me, right? And I actually didn't really know that, and at the time, and how I found out a little bit more about it, or starting to really ask the questions and start connecting the dots, is I was 16, and back in the day, if you wanted to start working at an early age at an official place, you needed to get permission from your parents. And I was part of a work program out of school. We had all our important papers in a metal can. Some people back in the day used to use a shoebox or whatever. And I asked about my birth certificate, and my mother said, "Go look in the can in the bedroom." I go in the can, and I'm a nosy kid. I'm supposed to be looking for my birth certificate, and I found my parents' marriage license, right? And at 16, we already had sex education class and that kind of stuff. Back in the day, they actually had the classes, right? And so my parents got married in April, and I was born in September, okay, of the same year. Now we can't leave that out, of the same year. And now April, May, June, July, August, September. One, two, three, four, five. So I went and asked my mother if I was premature. What did I do that for? Man, I don't even remember the outcome. That's how swift it was. It's like, like the idea of me asking if I was premature was so embarrassing to her that I got punished for that, right? I got punished for that. Um and it was bizarre. And then you had things like that. You had things like I'm the oldest child in the family, and how much different I was dealt with than my brothers and them, and it was almost had this feeling that some days I felt like the people just didn't like me, right? Because they would say stuff, when because they would ship me away in the summer, and I'd come back, and they would say, when you were gone, it was nice. It's like, how do you say that to your children? Right? And I look just like my daddy, right? And again, I'm the oldest, you know, and so I was lucky enough, probably should have spent more of this time, lucky enough to spend time with my grandfather, my mother's father, before he died. I spent a week or two in Charleston, South Carolina, and I would sit with him in the afternoon because and when he got older, his favorite thing was to watch the Playboy Channel, wrestling, and drink gin. So I'm sitting there with the old man watching the Playboy Channel and wrestling and drinking gin, be toe down by dinner time, right? But that's what he did, right? And during those times, he would talk about the family. He know a little bit about both families, and there was some kind of rumors that the families didn't care for each other because my daddy was a sharecropper son, my mother and them were kind of bougie, the light skinned Negroes and that kind of stuff. And what I gathered was there was some friction about the two of them being together in the first place, right? So we're talking about in a situation that was both good and traumatic at the same time, right? And trying to sort that out and going through that trauma, going through the trauma of being, we living in the projects when financially we could have lived somewhere else, and how, growing up with the ideal of being forced to either deal with my father or deal with the kids in the community, and all this thing around fighting, and and I wasn't even raised with all that noise. And when we moved into projects, which was another traumatic experience, and the domestic violence in our house, and being able and trying to keep peace as a child in the house with two adults, and uh and dealing with my father's drinking, and my mother's medication use, and the way they dealt with each other, and learn how to clean blood off a carpet, because we were very, even though we lived in the projects, all the projects looked the same, but when you came in our house, it was very different. You come in the house, everything was white. All the furniture was white, right, in the living room. We never sat in the living room. There was never a TV in our living room, right? And you know how people talk about, the old people talk about, yeah, we had white furniture, but it had plastic on it.
Right.
My
Yeah.
mother refused to put plastic on it and
Mm,
dared anybody to put a stain on that white furniture. And she would scare other people's kids about coming. If I got to be worrying about my furniture, then I don't need. Hey, if I got to put plastic on my furniture, I don't need this furniture,
mm,
right? So so we were very regimented and that kind of stuff, and using they wouldn't call it this, but using a certain amount of terror and intimidation to keep us four boys in line, right?
mhm,
And there was times when I called myself trying to use terror and intimidation to keep my brothers in line, but they wasn't having it. So
right.
it was, and there was again, there was a lot of these different things that was happening. We was part of a religion that was primarily white, and you had those issues in the name of God, and so I actually talked about this in public, and they
Mhm,
filmed it,
mm,
and that's how I got the tape. And I talked about how the different chaos and trauma, how it affected each one of my brothers differently, right? You know
right.
how you can have a family, and if your family sits down, they got a different story,
Right.
like from the oldest child to the baby boy, because
Right.
by the time your parents get to, if they're still together, by the time you get to the baby child, they done calmed down, and done got tired of fighting or whatever,
Sure.
you know.
Sure. Right.
So there's a different
Right.
different kind of thing. And um unfortunately, I don't know, I wouldn't say that this is the best way to have conversations with your family, but I remember the first time I had a conversation, I guess you can call it, about the trauma with my father was at my youngest brother's house. He was married by then, and we're all in the kitchen because my father would come to Minnesota, and that kind of stuff. And we're all in the kitchen, and it's me and my three brothers and my father, and we've been drinking. That's one thing we could all do together, is drink.
Mhm, mhm,
And I'm sitting there, and for some reason I'm getting upset, and I mean just getting furious. And um and I asked my father, I said, I got a question for you. And because when we grew up, we got beatings on schedules.
mm,
My mother would say stuff of like, you know, at dinner table, Samuel, I don't, tell about what we did that day, because my mother worked off and on, so she was,
mhm,
a housewife, but at times she worked as a nurse at nights, so there was always somebody home. And if my father didn't respond appropriately, she would say stuff like, they ain't had a whooping in a while. And
mm,
and I asked my father, I said, why did you whoop us when mama said so?
mhm,
And he paused, and he said, well, I had to live there too.
mm,
I was like, whoa.
mm.
And what was interesting about that moment is I knew that was the truth.
Yeah.
you know, I
Mm,
mean, it was said in such a way I knew that was the truth, and it was wild. This is wild,
mhm,
right? and that's probably not the best way to have one of those conversations. I tried to have a conversation with my mother. My mother was a professional victim, and I asked her one time when I had to, find my mother because my mother would run away to get attention,
Mm,
and so she ran away, disappeared, didn't call nobody. I track her down, and it would be like, oh, he loved me. It's like, what is
mhm.
this bizarre stuff, right?
Right.
And I asked my mother why is it, asked her about some of the stuff she did when we were growing up, and I asked her why, and she looked at me and said, why are you doing this to me?
Mm,
She was not trying to have that conversation,
mm,
right? And what's important about that is, we go through, like, say you go through treatment, and they got, out of the 12 steps, there's the step about making peace, and
right.
with people and dealing with those wounds, is sometimes um our family members are not ready to make peace with those kind of things.
Right.
Matter of fact, they don't even want to deal with them or have a conversation about them at
Yeah.
all,
Don't even bring them up.
right? And I would say wasting your time being mad at them is just that,
Right.
wasting time, right?
Mhm,
Uh, I remember I seen a podcast, and I think you were involved in the podcast with a young with a professor. I think he was a professor who talked about his grandmother, and his view of religion is kind of, um, he challenges the black folks' view of religion, right? And
mhm,
makes some valid points. But his grandmother wanted to know why was he doing that,
mhm,
and he said, I could have challenged my grandmother with that, and with my ideals, but I didn't think it was worth hurting her in that way,
mm,
especially at her age,
mhm,
right? Let her have that. That was the thing that was holding herself together.
mhm,
So there's the pieces we can break out in that, to answer this question about, what are constructive ways what to have a conversation about trauma in your family. And
mhm.
I think the other question is, what should you do first? Should you do your own healing first before you have that conversation? And so we can we can go there. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think that there's no cookie cutter way to approach dealing with trauma in the family. But I think one thing that's definitely right, what you said, is that most people in the family, when you're ready to talk about it, they're not ready. They're not even considering it. They don't want it to be brought up because it is too painful, and it forces people to look at themselves and see what role did they play in the trauma. And most people ain't ready to do that. And that's one of the reasons why this counseling in general isn't effective for most people, because they'll get to this point, they'll get to that line where it gets uncomfortable, where things have to get real, and they want to disengage or stop going because they don't want to go to that emotional place because it's so painful. And I agree with you in the statement that you made plenty of times, is that your trauma starts before you're even born. Most people's trauma starts before they're even born. My trauma started before I was even born. And I didn't realize that until a few years ago, when I started to learn more about the dynamics between my mom and her mother, and what that was like when my mom got pregnant during her senior year of high school, and how that just exploded into a whole nother thing. And here I am, a baby now, in the midst of all this craziness, but you don't even see it, right?
Right.
But as you grow up, you don't see it. You don't, and a lot of times you don't feel it because stuff is so normalized until you have those big explosions, the fights and the arguments. Those things you realize something ain't right, but you're a child. You don't have a lot of power to do anything about it. And what ends up happening is we just go through life not dealing with any of those pains, but we end up adapting, coping mechanisms, whether that's smoking, drinking, sexual pleasure, fast money, putting ourselves in risky situations. We'll do things to try to alleviate that pain, not knowing that there's a connection between the things that you experienced and what the activities that you're engaging in now. So when it comes time to actually deal with why people have the drinking problem, why people have the addiction issues, why people have, several failed partnerships and babies all over the place. Like when it's time to talk about those things and you connect it back to the family's like, those are your choices. Like you decided to do those things.
Right.
You the messed up person, not realizing that there is a connection between those things. So, when we talk about intergenerational trauma, this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. Just like on the larger scale, how black folks got to where we are today, it didn't just happen, 10 years ago or overnight. Like there were several things that took place that led to the current state that we're in. So, when it comes to intergenerational trauma and just having that conversation, it's not an easy conversation to have. Especially with elders, because in our community, we're conditioned to what? Not oppose or question what older people say. I mean, we
Yeah.
literally have sayings where we don't do that. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. Well, the thing what's interesting is the stories. Once you get people to start talking about family, there's a consistent line in many of the stories, right? It's interesting how much we want to get together as a family on holidays, right? And you get these stories when the alcohol starts flowing. Like when I gave the example of me and my brothers and my father sitting at the kitchen table. Even though we didn't celebrate a lot of holidays, it was during a holiday time. That's why my father came up because he had time off, and you hear these stories. There's a consistent line where you hear these stories where you'll get this, especially one of the older family members who start crying and start talking about stuff. You always didn't like me, like between the brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and or and that mother daughter dynamic. Oh man, I've seen in some of the relationships I've been in, I've seen some really interesting, negative, real kind of stuff between mothers and daughters, and probably in almost in every relationship I was in, there was this dynamic with the mothers and daughters in terms of a relationship, right? And again, when you are conditioned in our community not to talk about these things, then you act them out, right? And it's interesting how many of them had this love-hate relationship with their mother, but they always spent a good portion of their lives trying to get that mother to recognize them and say something good about them, right? I've seen women who are around my age or a little younger that when their moms died, you could see relief in their face. I mean, literally relief. And then I've seen some who start feeling the relief and start feeling bad, right? And need to talk about that, right? Because the thing is I've dealt with some women who've done their work and done their trauma, and they talk about, yeah, that love hate. You can love somebody, but you might hate the way they dealt with you, and both can be true. See, because the thing is in our community, because of our group trauma, we have a tendency to respond to trauma as all or nothing, good and bad, you know, pretty ugly, and all these kind of things. When it's not that simple. It really isn't that simple, because relationships are that simple. And when you throw in the trauma, then you don't want to deal with that piece of the relationship, then don't be surprised you have this chaos, right? I mean, it's amazing to me where you have, and you hear comics talk about it, where Uncle Pookie gets drunk and he goes off, and Aunt Mary cuss out everybody, and we look and we do this all the time, right? And when I got better, I put an end to that crap. I put an end to that crap, right? And when I put an end to that crap, man, I even when I when they filmed my talk about the family and my trauma starting, and they put it on Facebook, oh my God, I heard from relatives I ain't never heard. But why you put our information in online? And then I had at the time I had what was it? What would they call that? The local TV show?
Talk
What
show.
they
Yeah.
yeah,
Public access.
public access show? It was
Yeah.
only 12 shows, but those 12 shows still can be played to this day, right?
Mm,
And man, why you putting our business out in the street? My little brother said,
yeah.
"Man, daddy seen your video. He ain't happy with you."
Mm,
And like by that time, I didn't really care because I was working on. I done got to a point where I went through what I call the selfish period of healing.
mm,
Right?
yeah.
I was in that selfish period of healing. I'm getting healed, and I'm not saying it's necessarily good or bad, but I had to be focused on this is about me getting better, right?
Yeah.
Get me getting better to move forward, to be any good to my children. Because my
Right.
biggest goal was not to pass down as much of this trauma to my child or my
Right.
children, because I have a stepson too, which, I probably didn't fully do it as well as I could, but I knew that I knew that there was a connection,
Right.
right? But yeah, man, and then later on, one of the brothers I least expected to say that, he pulled me aside. He says, all that stuff you said about the family. He said, you was right.
Mm,
And he started getting sober. He still got his moments.
right.
got some people get sober and still their personality kind of sucks.
Right.
But the thing is because some of that stuff ain't drinking.
Right. Right.
But all of us got those personality traits. I got some, my grouchiness. I'm sober, but I'm still grouchy as heck. So it don't just change that. But he got sober. He's living his life. He's doing his own healing piece, maybe differently than mine. I'm leaning more toward the spiritual side of healing for him, where I'm probably not there on that side. I'm somewhere in the middle.
Hmm.
But the thing is we're so scared of this truth. Now realizing that without the truth, it's hard to heal.
Right.
And that's the thing I see, not as family, as individual, and then even bigger as a community. But to get into some of those questions, I think for me, I tried to um, do a piece around addressing my family,
Hmm.
before I did enough on healing myself.
Hmm.
And I think it's if I can get a better, I think what it is because as you often say, healing is a journey and not a destination. Is
Right.
that how you usually
Yeah.
put it?
Yep.
So you starting the healing process is probably a good place to start, right? So you
Hmm.
have an idea of where you're at, right? Because sometimes if we approach our families, what happens is we end up in this angry kind of ugly place. Um,
Right.
not being able to handle when they ain't trying to hear us,
Right.
right? You got to let them be, right? I mean, you say your piece, you got to let that be, right? As best you can, because some people will never get it. My mother never got it.
Hmm.
Which is unfortunate. I feel for her, that she died without really making peace with her trauma, because my mother was walking around, and I think this was the other important thing for me. We talk about ancestry, right?
Hmm.
uh I think for some families we need to do a trauma tree.
Mm.
And I know that sounds sick to some people, but I did a trauma tree, right? I started examining some of the stories. I still didn't get the full stories, but bits and pieces about my grandmother, my mother's mother, who treated my mama like shit, right? And then
Hmm.
because we were her kids, she treated us like shit, but she treated my auntie better. At least that's
Hmm.
the way we seen it, right?
Mm.
I know that some of my relatives say, "Well, Sammy, I think you're being exaggerated," and maybe I am, but I know how it felt to me, right?
Right. Right.
And and she didn't. When you're a kid and you can pick up that there's something wrong, but nobody's talking to you,
Right.
especially when you're a kid. See,
Right.
kids, they don't come in this world corrupted, right? They get corrupted along the way, right?
Mhm.
And when you see and feel what you see and feel, and people around you, especially adults, keep telling you what you seeing and feeling ain't right,
Mhm.
it gets
Mhm.
it gets worse as you go older. But I knew that I didn't like the old way the old woman treated me. And I didn't care much for that old woman because she treated us bad, treated my mama bad, right? And I grew up kind of resenting my grandmother. And I know that's, oh God, oh Lord, he didn't say
Mhm.
grandmother. You think talking about your mama is bad. Talk about granny. Oh my God, he done
Right.
broke the taboo. Not granny. No,
Right.
but I learned about her trauma.
Mm. Mm.
I learned about her trauma. And my grandmother had a hard time
Mhm.
making peace with some of her stuff. You know, not growing up, not being able to trust men. My grandfather, he wasn't. He was a pretty Negro, but he wasn't the most loyal black man,
Mm.
right? And my mother looked just like my grandfather,
Mm.
right? And again, you can literally see her treat my aunt and my aunt's kids differently than us. And when
Mm.
I understood more about my grandmother's trauma, it's like, oh, I start connecting the dots, right? Because she didn't make peace with her trauma.
Right.
Start connecting the dots, right? And I was in that process. I was able to feel for her and
Mm.
was able to let go of that. There was those feelings of anger and self pity that I was feeling within, and again, I was able to feel that.
Right.
Um, um, Same thing with my parents. Understanding that my mother, there was a period. The understanding is there was a period where my mother was in foster care or some type of foster care, where a family who was a little bit more well-to-do took my mother in, put her my mother, pretty woman, pretty little girl, light skin, put her in petticoats, and so my mother learned at a young age there was power in being a victim,
Mm.
right? Because these people took her in and coddled her and all this other kind of stuff, and which if you play victim enough, you mess up relationships in the
Mm.
long run, right? And that's how trauma works, right?
Right.
Especially long-term trauma. In the moment, it works to help us survive. But if we
Right.
don't learn no new skills, we keep doing that same trauma and then keep wondering why it ain't working no more, right? You can't play victim with everybody.
Right.
You can't play victim with your friends. You can't play victim with your family for a long period of time and not be accountable and think that's okay.
Yep.
Okay. And again, I understand her trauma, of wanting to be loved by her mama. Just love me, because she would bend over backwards. She would make sure we go see grandma, and we would say to her, and I feel bad about this. As a kid, we would tell my mama, we don't want to see that old lady,
Mm.
and the look on her face was like, my kids don't even want to see her,
Dang. Wow.
right? But she took us anyway. But
Mm.
but again, because she wanted that old lady to realize I love you. Now nobody in the group know how to show the love because of all the
Right.
trauma.
Right.
They all knew they were all strong black women. Then there was this tension between my mama and my aunt, because my aunt was jealous of my mama, right? Because she had a steady relation, marriage, and all this other kind of stuff, right?
Mhm.
It was this bizarre, all this tension in the family. And then we had to go visit this noise.
Wow.
And then my father, he spent all his life trying to get my grandfather to love him, but my daddy was a mama's boy. And my grandfather was, and I didn't know him a lot, but the impression I got, he was a tough man. sharecropper, so he catching hell from white people. My grandmother was over the top Christian, so she used to use her Christian behavior to run the family. I mean, literally, she used to terrorize folks with Christianity to run the family, and to the point where the impression I get, my grandfather was scared of her, so that
Mm.
kept her safe, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like, and my grandfather, was a sharecropper, bootlegger, but he was hard on my daddy,
Mhm.
and I think he was hard on my daddy because he was worried about my father being too soft, and we still see that craziness to this day,
Right.
right? And when my grandfather got sick, we went from Illinois to South Carolina. So we was down there for almost a month. My father took off a month, and I remember my father did everything he could to try to save my grandfather's life, even if you're going out into the woods to see a witch
Mm.
doctor. I'll never forget this. It's like, but
Wow.
that's why I don't watch horror movies now. We went
Mm.
out to the woods to see this old shriveled up old lady who was mixing up potions and I see people think I'm lying. No, man, down in
Oh yeah.
Mississippi and
Oh
South
yeah.
Carolina and that the
The
voodoo
Delta
lady,
area.
she real.
Yeah.
Okay. She was real. And so we went in and he took me with us because they said bring the oldest child,
Mm.
the oldest boy. And I was like, and we went in there and she did some kind of stuff and she gave him a candle and he told her if he lives after the candle burns down, if he don't die
Mhm.
before the candle burn down, he'll live. Sure as shooting, he died that night, right?
Oh.
And it's like, and then all the older children, all the oldest firstborn had to go. We had to wear these because down south they take funerals. Back in the day, they took funerals serious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody wear black with the little black.
Mhm.
Me and my brothers, we blew that up when we got older because we was out calling ourselves being drug dealers and pimps and stuff, and went down there in pink suits and stuff. Just messed the whole family up when my uncle died. But I thought it was appropriate for my uncle because my uncle wasn't nothing but a player anyway. So
Mm.
we had our player uniforms on,
It was a,
But
a
that's
tribute, the salute.
it was. Now that I think about it, that's exactly what it was, man. Because it was. I know I'm getting off my, but that was some bizarre stuff at my uncle's funeral because they didn't know what
Mhm.
to do with us, with all the slick back hair and like I said, the pink suits
Mm.
and pearl white shoes and smelling good and actually we were smelling like dope because we were smoking in the back of the limousine, but that's a whole nother issue. So let me move on. See now, I'm getting all off in the deep end, but the thing is that whole trauma for my father
Yeah.
because he never all he wanted was that old man to say he loved him,
Mm.
right? And that's how that family trauma shows up. So how do you talk about that? Again, I think for me, it got easier once I started understanding the connection of my trauma to the connection of the trauma of my family. And when I was able, and I think the most important thing, other than the fact of working through my stuff, part of me working through my stuff was being able to do what I call the family trauma tree. Right. Again,
Mhm.
I don't say everybody should do that because it's not easy. But the thing is, it helped me have compassion for them. It helped
Mm.
me be able to learn how to forgive. Because it's interesting how and again, this is just what I've observed. Doesn't make it right in our community to be so Christiany and so religious. How unforgiving we are
Mm.
of each other. How
Mhm.
many, of these kind of pieces we hold on to
Mm.
these pains that we hold on to, but we call ourselves a forgiving people. But
Right.
I didn't see a whole lot of forgiveness, even though we were very parts of our family always had some type of religion. Some of us were more religious than others, and some of them probably I found to be the least forgiving of the bunch,
Mm,
right? But I think to be able to let go of my, for lack of better words, anger and hurt and pain that I felt was caused by family. That because again, we feel that family, if nowhere else, family is the one place you're supposed to feel love,
right.
and how do you feel love when you don't know what that is, or you don't know what that's supposed to feel like. And see, the problem we have, especially as Black people, we're under this umbrella of racism,
Hmm.
right? That has treated us so humanely, which makes us even try harder to in terms of trying to be treated like human beings. uh Also puts us in a position where we can't be honest
Right.
about the pain, right?
Right.
So we're fighting two battles. So I don't want folks who's listening to believe that I ignore systems, right? But
Hmm.
up under that umbrella of racism and racist systems is looking at family.
Right.
So because I'm a focus on the inside out, you know,
Hmm.
me, family, then community, which puts us in a more powerful position to really challenge systems. And folks who want to do it from the outside in, I support them,
Hmm.
and I think that's important work. But it's not for me. It's not one or the other. It's got to be both. So
Gotcha.
I'm done. Anything you want to add? Because I was a little all over the place, especially when I got to talking about my uncle's funeral. I'll tell
Yeah.
that story one day because the funeral stories are a trip in our community. You
I
know.
but that's I mean, I think that's just a good example of this conversation of healing because a lot of truths and uncomfortable traumas come out during funerals. And I think that there's been a huge shift in how our cultural grieving practices as Black people has changed.
Right.
And we used to have a lot more, and to be completely honest, I believe we used to have a lot more dignity and respect when people died, even though there were arguments and fights and things would happen. But even just what you were talking about, how y'all got dressed up, everybody wore black, and they took it serious. Like there was a home going for this
Right.
person. There was a respect and dignity given, no matter how awful they may have been. But now people show up to funerals in pajamas. Like it's just like that's the trauma. I mean, I ain't trying to be funny, but I literally was at a funeral where somebody had pajamas on. I mean,
Yeah.
this happens.
Well, the thing is, and maybe this not might not be it, but we're not scared of death as
Yeah, exactly.
we're more scared of
Exactly.
living for some of us in our community, and
Exactly.
parts of our community can't deal with that reality.
Right.
You can't expect folks to be nonviolent who ain't scared of dying, who are
Mm-hmm.
more afraid of living, right?
Mm.
And that's a hard thing to swallow, but
Mm-hmm.
that's real, right?
Yeah.
So that reverence for of a person's passing, well, the term homegoing and that kind of stuff got lost. But there's something that's in the comments I need to address that is
Okay,
really
go
on
for it.
point. Is as you begin to heal, it can feel very isolating from your family. Oh my God.
Mm.
Very? No, it is isolating. And especially and even more so in our community because you almost that's the one thing that why people have difficulty staying sober and
Mm.
doing our healing. Because it is lonely. As much as we might fight amongst ourselves and that kind of stuff, we have a real difficult time with that loneliness piece,
Right.
right? That's the most difficult thing for me to get through my recovery from my trauma, my drug use, my drug selling, my over the top Christian judgmental Christianity was being because you will get isolated in the
Yeah.
short term. You will get isolated, man. It's like man, shoot, man. And the problem with me though is I got so used to being isolated, now it's more difficult to be included
Mm,
because I done made so much peace and comfort by myself that it kind of done went a little too far. But that's the piece that's hard for us. I
yeah,
remember, and it was a panel me and you were on. You remember that panel we was on for one of the Black women conferences,
yeah,
and the sister,
Baraza. Yeah, yeah, I
yeah, and
remember.
the,
Yeah,
and the
that was
sister.
that was a very interesting event. I was a lot more radical and pro-black back then too. But
And remember the sister was she was from Chicago asked the question, uh
yeah,
uh
yeah,
how do you she I think she's from Chicago, she moved to Minnesota, doing
yeah,
well, but she kept saying that she kept getting drawn back into
uh,
family stuff in Chicago
yeah,
by her mama, you
yeah,
know, and it was causing her a whole lot of tension. And she said, "How do you deal with that?" She keeps asking for stuff. She know I'm doing well, but she asked for stuff that's just really unreasonable and that kind of stuff. And I don't
yeah,
know how this is my mama and all this
yeah,
other kind of stuff. And you remember what my
yeah.
answer
You
was?
gave her a nice, simple answer. Start telling mama no. And you should have. I mean, if y'all can see this woman's face, it was like she's seen the ghost. But literally, at some point, I think this happens a lot when we're on our healing journeys. Is we start to see people and not as the labels that they and the statuses that they carry in our lives. And when that switch turns, it offers an opportunity to move beyond some of the pain that has happened and
Right.
start looking for some reconciliation or some repair. And when you said that to her, I think she was faced with, can I actually do that? Can I say no to my mom?
Yeah, but the thing is but her response wasn't as major as the response of the room, because
The
we remember
audience,
the
yeah,
room is
audience,
all,
all black women for the most
yeah,
part. Yeah,
and they sucked the life out the room.
yeah.
It's like, how dare he?
We had to
And
get up
then
out of
she
there.
stood there for a minute, and then all of a sudden you see this big smile on her face,
Yep.
this big smile on her face, like she was given permission,
Yeah. Finally, yeah. Somebody said what she was feeling.
right?
Eh, Yeah.
and,
Mm,
and she was given permission to take care of herself.
yep.
And I did explain that at the same time, the price we pay in the short term is the isolation,
Yep.
but in the long run, you'll feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. You get that weight off your shoulders and off your back. I often tell the story about when I had to tell my mom no for the first time when I was in college, and it was like sophomore year of college. I'm literally working two jobs and doing an internship and going to school full time, living on campus. And I was doing this for almost the whole school year. And I would send both of my checks to my mom. Like I would literally save like $60 so I could party on the weekend and then send her the rest of my money. And I'm a college student, which I'm already broke. College students are broke. And it got to a point where I was like, man, I can't keep doing this. And I remember my mom called me and I knew what the call was. It was, we gonna send that money call. And I said, Mom, I ain't sending you the money. And I just remember how my heart was just pounding to say
Right,
that. I
right,
didn't feel that again until I found out I was gonna have a baby. And I was like, oh man, even though I was trying, I was like, it was just that pressure of like life is about to change.
right,
And I told my mom no, and it was just like an awkward silence. And
right.
then she said, okay, I understand. And then the conversation ended. And from that moment, the dynamic of our relationship, I mean, our relationship had already changed, but it had went to a different level because at that time she respected my adulthood. She actually respected my adulthood and my ability to say no and break that barrier. Now, what has changed though, that didn't stop her for asking for stuff as we went forward, but she wouldn't just ask me and expect it automatically. It would be one of those things where she's like, look, I really need help at this point. Can you assist? And I'm more than willing to do that. But it took me to take that weight off of my own shoulders and have some boundaries for myself and say no, which is blasphemous in the black community to say no to mama or let alone big mama. You just say no to big mama, you in
Right.
trouble too.
Well, see, the issue is though, what was great, is your mama accepted it.
Right. Right.
Okay, it's like, I've been in situations where, you say, for example, you are, say, for example, you're getting ready to have Thanksgiving dinner at your house, right?
Mm,
and you got a sibling who has a major drug problem, right?
Mm,
And they steal.
mm,
And you say, okay, we can have Thanksgiving at my house, but Pookie can't come.
mm,
Pookie calls Nana. Nana calls you and say, baby, why can't Pookie come? Well, Mama, Nana, he got problems, and I don't want to deal with that. I want to have
right.
I want to have a good time at my house or my house. Well, baby, yeah, I mean, no, we only get together so often, and sometimes you just have to overlook some things and all like this. Well, Nana, I don't want to deal with this. And then she pulls. Well, if he can't come, I'm not coming.
Mm,
Okay. So she beat me down. Say so you get beat down, and so you say, okay, he can come, but his girlfriend can't come
mm.
because she's still too. Okay.
Right.
And he called Nana again. Nana called. Why can't Pookie's girlfriend come? Nana, I just can't have it. Why?
Mm.
I said, because I only can watch one crackhead at a time.
Oh man.
And she she ain't trying to hear none of that. Well, if
Right.
he ain't coming, because he said he ain't coming if he don't bring his girlfriend. I said, well, it's like this. Don't come.
Mm, mm,
Oh my goodness. Oh man. And then what happens is now Nana calls everybody else in the family, and all other family members talking about they ain't coming, and how could you do that? Nana, and she ain't got that much time and all like that. Shoot, man. You know,
mm.
in my case, I had a similar case. I had a good Thanksgiving dinner by myself, a lot of leftovers. They didn't play that noise no more.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about when that happened to me, my sibling later on told me, that was the best thing you could have done because you made me check
Mm,
myself, right?
mm.
Because we don't know, we keep trying to make peace with crazy behavior and because of the family. And but we don't realize and we will sacrifice members in our family to keep the peace in the family.
Yeah.
It's like sexual assault in the family, and you want to keep the family name or that family member is an upstanding citizen or community leader, and you'll sacrifice the child. Or and a lot of times it was in a lot of cases a little girl, but now we're starting to realize and hear more about boys and stuff like that. You
Right.
know, uh, 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 and then at the cost of the child, just for the collective. But we grew up that way. As a
Right.
people, we survived that way. The collective has been more important than the individual, and it's gotta uh, it's gotta come to a time when both and the
Mm,
collective and the individual. We got to quit sacrificing our children, quit
mm,
sacrificing each other for to hide this trauma or to look good in some cases to white people or people outside our system or to the other Negroes in the family or other Negroes in the church who ain't doing us no good no way.
mhm.
Because the most relieving thing, yeah, healing is painful, ain't easy in the
Right.
short term. But when you get on the other side, oh my, you get even angrier. You know why you get even angrier? Because it's like, why did I wait this long?
Mm, mm,
And I personally, I envy you because if I'd have figured it out at your age, man, I'd be a monster right now. Although I'd probably be full of myself because maybe that was a good time for coming up later, because I would have been a mess. But the thing is the fact is I did,
yeah.
right? And so and so being honest about these kind of feelings because they're real and they're not easy, right? They're not
Mm,
easy because a lot of our behavior of trying to protect the group, protect the community, protect the family is all the safety measures out of our overall trauma of being Black in America.
Mm.
But again, if we start in, we come the inside out, man, can you imagine if we can get a handle on some of this trauma within ourselves, our families,
Yeah.
and our community, man, the system wouldn't know what the hell to do with
Yeah.
us.
We literally would shut down. I mean, we literally would shut down facets of industries,
Right.
like from prison to social services, even to educational institutions. These things will have to start to respond differently because we will be healthier, and a lot of these things function off. They literally exist off of our dysfunction, I should say, instead
And,
of they function off of it.
and that dysfunction as a result of the mistreatment. So again,
Exactly.
we cannot
Exactly.
ignore that piece. This stuff is happening, right? And yes, we are resilient people, but we're creative people. But again, this whole thing about healing is sometimes we're so creative that sometimes our creativity is stuck in so much darkness. and
Absolutely.
and and so so you got the good and bad of all of that.
Absolutely. You want to answer the second question before we close out? And I see Kai's commented that a lot of white women be unemployed. That is very true. That is very true. That's one of the little kept secrets of our workforce is that white women definitely are employed due to the dysfunction of Black folks, which is very ironic because a lot of white women were involved in Black Lives Matter. But that's a whole nother conversation. So
Now see, you starting stuff before
I'm not.
at the
I'm not
end.
starting nothing.
At the end, you
Just
always
pay
starting stuff
attention.
at the end.
I mean, the optics. You got to look at the optics. What am I looking at here? Always ask yourself that question. When you are in a high emotional sense, just take a step back and say, what am I actually looking at? So anyway, do you want to answer the question? Is it possible to talk about healing in your family without doing your own healing work first?
I think it works best if you start your own healing work first,
Right.
right? Because what happens if you start your own healing work first, you don't go in there with the emotion as much emotional destructiveness as you might otherwise,
Mm,
right? Because I've seen people go in and you MFs didn't care nothing about me and all. I mean, you
yeah.
getting ready to start a fight, you know, and probably a legitimate fight. You
Right.
calling me an MF. I'm your daddy. I'm getting ready. I brought you in this world. I'll take you out. But the whole thing about being able to do my stuff and also realize that you might not get a receptive response
Mm,
from sharing your story. Remember,
right.
it's your story.
Hmm.
See, our trauma affects how we see things, how we hear things, and how we say things. So,
Hmm.
what our parents will hear, like my mother, her response was, "Why are you doing this to me?" Right? It's like, I'm talking to you about what you did to me. But what she hear is you punishing her, right?
Mm,
And if I hadn't done some of my work at that time, I still was angry, but I would have acted it out.
right.
And I at that point I knew that she wasn't able to handle it. I still said what I had to say, and her response was with a response, and I had to realize that it might not go no further than that. So that's
Mm,
why I say starting your process first makes it a little less harmful, if
hmm.
I guess is the right word.
Yeah.
Because
It,
because abuse gets abuse, right? It's
mm,
like people justifying, well, you abuse me, so that justifies me abusing you. No, somebody has to have some honor and
mm,
compassion in the routine,
right.
in the process. So
Absolutely.
that's my
And
answer.
I would agree. And I would just say you should have some compassion in the routine for yourself and some honor for yourself as well, because that's how you help prevent things from going left when you're trying to have those conversations. So I think that's a good place to close out for today. I want to thank all the folks who came to us live, or the folks who are watching this on the playback. Please go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Healing Brothers. And then also share this episode. If you found something constructive, share this. You may be in a place where you want to have that conversation with your family, but they ain't ready. Go ahead and just send them this link, and let's see if we can get some at least some thoughts started for some folks, and see if they'll actually like pay attention to some of these things, because we do gotta do that internal healing process within our families, because we have so much pain and trauma that happens and goes unnoticed, and then it just builds up and gets even more complex. So on that note, anything you want to close out with, Sam?
And on added to that, that's where it flows into community, right? That's where it flows in the community. And again, if doing this will actually help us solve some of the problems that we are seeing in our community in a shorter period of time, not that it won't take a long time, but a shorter period of time, truth can cut through a lot of that mess. And even though it will be painful in the short term. So y'all stay safe. We'll be back next week.
Peace, everybody.